I'm Deboki, and this is Okie Dokie Boki, and today I'm really excited because I'm going to be going over my TBR for Nonfiction November, and I'm also going to be doing some recs for both some, nonfiction reads, if you're looking for some ideas, as well as some booktubers who I think talk about nonfiction in really interesting ways, who give good recommendations, so I'm excited to be doing all of that in today's video. Nonfiction November is a yearly event. It happens, obviously, in November, and I'm going to link to all of the organizers down below, so thank you to all of them for all of their work putting everything together. They put together prompts for reading, they put together Instagram challenges, they're doing a group read this year, so check out all of their announcement videos and stuff. Again, I'll link down below if you want more information about other events in Nonfiction November or other ways you can participate. This is my favorite month on BookTube. Obviously, nonfiction is good to read all year round, but inevitably, especially of the books that I buy, nonfiction books are the ones that I buy most frequently, which means they also accumulate on my shelves over the course of the year. And so for me, last year, Nonfiction November was a really great way for me to actually sit down and be you're gonna read these books now, you're gonna learn some cool shit. This year, Nicole over at Sweeney Says and we've been doing a nonfiction book club together on a monthly basis. So that has been a good way for me to actually make progress on reading more nonfiction. And I think we maybe have both been using it as a way to get to some of the nonfiction books that have been on our shelves for a while. But there are still many more books on my shelves to get to. So I'm really excited for November because I am going to finally get to some of them. So I'm going to get into my TBR now. There are roughly some categories that unite some of these books, so I'm going to keep them kind of grouped together. So I have one group that's sort of my media culture kind of group, another group that's the science nature kind of group, and then a little bit more of an uncategorized group at the end. So let's start with the media pop culture group. So the first book that I want to read is going to be White Negroes When Cornrows Were in Vogue and Other Thoughts on Cultural Appropriation by Lauren Michelle Jackson. There's this review on the back that I feel really gets at what I'm hoping for from this book. It's from Eval Ewing. She says, miraculously, Lauren Michelle Jackson is able to write about cultural appropriation in a way that doesn't make you want to drink a glass of sand, which I think is appropriate because I feel cultural appropriation is one of those topics where it's I have my very strong personal feelings about it and what it looks like to me and how I think about it. And then inevitably the internet makes me not want to ever talk about it because it is a thing that gets argued about in ways that I find deeply uninteresting. But the reason why I decided to pick up this book actually has nothing to do with the topic. It has to do with Lauren Michelle Jackson because she's had a lot of stuff in the past summer that I've realized I keep seeing her name again attached to things that I'm that I find very interesting. She wrote this piece in Vulture called Anti-Racist Reading Lists, What Are They For? And she used that to talk about not criticizing the notion of anti-racism, but talking about the ways that we talk about these books. And really the ways that we talk about books overall in conversations about identity and particularly about racism. But the other thing that really got me interested in her work overall has nothing to do with that, and it is about Taylor Swift and folklore. Actually, maybe just Taylor Swift in general. She has very good Taylor Swift opinions. When Folklore came out, the New York Times podcast did an episode about her, and then they did where I kind of disagreed with their takes, but whatever, they were entitled to it. But they did a follow-up podcast where they were answering listener questions about folklore, and they called on her and another guest to join in the podcast to answer these questions. And a thing I have found in general when it comes to things like Taylor Swift and Real Housewives, if I find someone who I think has the right opinions about those things, it does a lot to make me really interested in their other work. It's not there are wrong there are definitely wrong opinions, but it's not if you have the wrong opinion, I will necessarily write you off entirely. I might, but I try to exercise some judgment, but people who I think have the right opinions and who are interesting in their opinions, and especially who make me reassess my own opinions about those things, I am always deeply interested in their other work. So related to my developing fangirlness over Lauren Michelle Jackson, she has influenced me to buy other books. So she tweeted about In Search of the Black Fantastic, Politics and Pop Culture in the Post-Civil Rights Era by Richard Eiton. And I think for me particularly why I was interested in it is I feel a conversation that we've been having on BookTube a lot is about how we talk about politics and books in our reading. And I feel that has been a conversation that has been interesting, good to have, but I still feel like I'm sort of like in my infancy of like understanding it, I guess, in terms of the bigger picture. So that's part of why I'm really interested in this book, because I think from what I understand, part of what it is about how we, I guess, talk about pop culture in relation to politics. And so, yeah, I think that is a thing that I need to learn more about, because I think there are people who are doing this at a much deeper and academic level than me, just like spouting off some things about how I think this should all work. So the last book in my sort of like media culture sort of assessment category, I guess, is The View from Somewhere: Undoing the Myth of Journalistic Objectivity by Lewis Raven Wallace. And this is a book that I've had on my shelf for a few months, and I've been really wanting to get to it because basically, as you can, again, tell from the title, this is going to be a book about the notion of objectivity and how it is not necessarily a real one when it comes to media. And obviously, like, objectivity is a thing that media companies are like sometimes held to, like it's a standard in media, in science as well, which is another reason why I'm interested in it. It's like this really false notion that we like think somehow we are capable of. But I also think that sometimes when we talk about the notion of how objectivity is like false, we sometimes like apply that in really broad strokes. And so part of the reason why I'm really interested in this book is that the different chapters of this book focus on specific examples, like really kind of specific case studies of like what objectivity or the lack thereof of it has looked like in like very specific historical contexts and also more recent contexts. So like it includes chapters on Black Lives Matter protests, how that was covered in media. There are also chapters on like the AIDS crisis, how trans people are covered by media, like all of these different like aspects. And I think it's really useful to have so that there's like just more, you know, more specificity in how we talk about something that is just so easy to generalize in a very unproductive way. Next up, we've got the science books, and I'm going to start off with the obvious thing that I will definitely be getting to next month, which is The End of Everything, Astrophysically Speaking by Katie Mack. This is a recent release about the end of everything, astrophysically speaking, about different ways that the universe can end. The reason why I will definitely be reading this in the next few weeks is because Nicole and I picked it for our next nonfiction book club book. So we're going to be talking about this on November 14th at 5 p.m. Eastern on this channel. So if you want to join in and chat with us on our live stream and talk about the ways that the universe will end, you should definitely join us. I think it'll be fun to read this, especially like in 2020. I think 2020 is a year to talk about how, like, you know, the entire universe can end. Another thing we realized is that this discussion is going to be like after the election, like pretty soon after. So we're going to see how we feel about the apocalypse. Another reason why I'm really interested in this book overall is because I am not a space person. There's, you know, that like stereotype or like cliche that like, you know, kids grow up either like dinosaur kids or space kids. I was neither. I was an immunology kid because that is who my parents raised me to be. And so space for me is a thing that now I like am learning more about because of work stuff. And like I have moments of being like, oh, this is why everybody loves space. That's pretty cool. So I'm excited to learn more about space, even if it's in the ways that space is terrifying. On a similar space note, I'm planning to read Stephen Hawking, A Memoir of Friendship and Physics. This was written by Leonard Mlodinow, who is a physicist. He's written some other popular science-y kind of books. This book was sent to me by the publishers Pantheon. Again, like I said, space and physics just in general is not my strong suit. And Stephen Hawking is like a really compelling figure in all of this. I remember, so I went to Caltech when I was an undergrad, and he did sort of like a yearly visit to Caltech, and so like it was sort of a thing that like your freshman year you would go see like his talk that he did for like a more general audience, and he was really, really interesting to listen to. So I'm interested in learning more about him and learning more, I guess. Like, friendship and physics is hard for me because, like, physics to me is, like, a deeply unfriendly thing, but I also understand that people who love physics have found other people who have loved physics through it. So I think it will be really interesting to learn more about, like, you know, people's personal experiences in the field and, like, their relationships with each other. So next, less on the physics end and more on the, like, nature and is Landmarks by Robert Macfarlane. So I talked about Robert Macfarlane recently in like my library check-in video because I had checked out Underland by him recently and had not gotten a chance to read it. I read like the first few pages of it, but that was basically like right when the library was like, hey, you need to return this. So I was kind of like, okay, you know, I'll come back to this another time, but I do still want to read his work. And so I was just looking through his other books, and this sounded really, really interesting to me. It's about like British countryside, nature stuff, but also from what I've read of the summary, it sounds like it's also about like language and how we use the language to describe nature, which is a thing that I always find really fascinating. So yeah, I was just really interested in like this strange summary it had that was just like, this is about like basically nature in words. So I'm excited to see what that means and learn more about Macfarlane's writing, because all of his books in general, like that I've read about, it sounds like they are very good. It sounds like they're very interesting. The last book in my nature category is going to be an audiobook, and this is Vesper Flights by Helen McDonald, and I believe she's also narrating it. And I got this through the Libro FM ALC Advanced Listener Copy Program. I just finished H is for Hawk and loved it, and part of the reason why I read H is for Hawk is because I knew Vesper Flights was coming out, and I'd seen like some great reviews of it. H is for Hawk also has like all of these amazing reviews of it, so I was like, you know what, I need to finally sit down and read some of her work. And so I loved H is for Hawk. I'm going to be talking about it in, I believe, my next video. I have a whole thing that I've drafted up about that and Real Life by Brandon Taylor, so I'm excited to be talking about those books. So I'm also excited to be reading Vesper Flights. It's an essay collection. It's about nature, about a bunch of different things in nature, which I think is just going to be super nice to get to right now. And yeah, I'm excited for it because I loved Helen McDonald's writing in H is for Hawk, and I'm really curious to see how she works in essay form. I just realized this is actually probably the last book in my science category. It's also probably related to stuff in like the media category, except this is more how-to than anything. So this is the book, The Craft of Science Writing. This is a collection, anthology or whatever, edited together by Siri Carpenter. It is about how to do science writing, and that is a thing that I do for money. That is my job. So this has been a book that I have been wanting to read for a while. It's put together, I think, based on things that are in the Open Notebook, which is an excellent resource if you're interested in science writing. They have a lot of great information about how to do science writing, how to pitch editors, a lot of different things. So you should definitely check out the Open Notebook. I've also been wanting to read this book because I feel like there's a lot of things, like now that I've gotten like a year or two of just like writing under my belt, like I'm starting to figure out like, you know, there are things that I want to work on, like what other things do I want to build in my writing, in my outside of writing skills, like, you know, businessy kind of skills, like all of that different stuff. And so I think craft is going to be like a big thing for me to figure out. I mean, obviously it is. I think that's what people are always figuring out when they're writers. So last up is my sort of like uncategorized category, which is not like a reflection on the books themselves. It's just that like I tend to read a lot of things in pop culture analysis world, a lot of things in science world, but there's also all of this other nonfiction that I need to read. And so that is where I'm at. First up in that uncategorized book is actually a book that maybe does sort of cross sort of like some of that like media and sciencey kind of stuff, but in a way that I actually don't think really fits neatly into either. And so this is How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy by Jenny Odell. When this book first came out, it had a lot of hype around it, and in a way that like for me, I kind of rolled my eyes at a little. A lot of what I understand this book to be about is that it's like about our approach to things like productivity and work, especially in an age with like the internet. All of that stuff that we like associate with social media in terms of like trying to like optimize ourselves, but also things that are always distracting us. And so like I said, I rolled my eyes a little bit at this when it first came out, but like especially over the last year, I've realized that I was being kind of, I don't know, I think dismissive and borderline defensive about my own habits with the internet. And it's really only like been like through like realizing some of the things that I do online that I like am actively like sabotaging myself in terms of like my happiness. It's only really been like by being upfront with myself about that in the past few months that like I am now like actually really interested in this book, because I want to understand some of that a little bit better, and I want to see it sort of like couched in something bigger. So last but definitely not least, it's probably one of the ones that I actually feel like most urgent about getting to, is Ants Among Elephants, An Untouchable Family in the Making of Modern India by Sujata Gidla. This book is about Gidla's family and her experience with growing up in the Dalit caste in India. With the way that the caste hierarchies play out, the Dalit caste is at the bottom of the caste system. That is the caste that you've probably heard described as untouchable untouchables, and it is a system that is deeply unjust. It is technically not in place in India, but like the thing with systemic injustice, systemic inequalities, these things that, you know, have been built on a certain infrastructure, like even when you remove those infrastructures, the prejudices and the like actual systemic issues that are at play, like still manage to persist. And this has persisted to this day in ways that, you know, for me at least, I understand it in terms of American inequality, like in how I see it in terms of racism and stuff in America. But I know that like this country that my family comes from and this system that has definitely privileged my family and me, I know that it's still playing out in really horrific ways for people. Like it's definitely been a thing where I've realized in the past year that like I really don't know that much about the caste system. I don't know that much about the history of it, the history of abolishing it, the history of like why it continues to this day, and also the present day reality of it. And so there are a lot of like books that I am planning to get to, but I wanted to start with this memoir because it is like a personal recent story. I just wanted to start with this and then basically go out from there. Okay, so that is my TBR, but also I wanted to do some recommendations. I'm going to start with a recommendation for 3 booktubers to follow if you are looking for ideas for nonfiction books to read. So the first is Vanessa over at Split Reads. She talks about a lot of different books, but she has a lot of nonfiction that she reads. I think like her videos are great, especially if you love someone who combines being very chill with being very critical. Like she has that really good balance, and I just love listening to her talk about books. The next rec is for Jen from Remembered Reads. She reads all of these nonfiction books where like whenever I like sit down and watch one of her videos, I'm like, damn, that's a book I haven't heard of. That's a book I haven't heard of. That's a book. Like there are so many, like even just like down to topics where I'm like, shit, I didn't even know that was a thing that I could like that existed for me to read about. Like I think the range of things that she reads in terms of nonfiction is just super broad. And so I would definitely recommend her videos as well. And then third is Justin at Ghost Reader. He does a lot of great individual reviews of nonfiction books, which I think is not something I have seen a lot of on BookTube. A lot of times when I see nonfiction reviews, like it's usually part of like another like wrap up and stuff like that. So I think especially if you are like looking just like for ideas of nonfiction books to read, like I think wrap ups are really great because you just sit down with like a whole list of books. And then also like if you don't want to sit down for a whole wrap up, like you're not sure like, do I want to invest like 20 minutes to like watch all of these books go by and then maybe see if one of them hits? Like if you want to just go to someone's channel and like look through all of the books that they've done individual reviews of and then like pick a few out and like watch those videos and see how they sound. Like I think like his channel is super great for that because you can just kind of go through and see like, yeah, okay, this is a book that sounds interesting from the title. What are his thoughts on it? So those are 3 people who I think like are super worth following if you want some more ideas for nonfiction books to read, not just for November, but all year round. Also, again, shameless plug, Nicole at Sweeney Says and I, we do a book club together and you should join us because it is a lot of fun and we just like to sit there and talk to each other about nonfiction books. And so that's something that we started this year. I'm going to link to a playlist of our live streams down below. So any of those books, if they sound interesting to you that we've talked about, you should click on the discussion because then you can hear us talk about it. And I think we're funny. We're probably not funny. I don't care. We think we're funny. And whatever it is, we have a good time talking to each other about these books and talking about what we learned. So hopefully you will too. So in terms of like specific books that I would recommend, last year I did this whole nonfiction November TBR and Rex video too. I had a lot of recommendations in that video, so I'm going to link to that down below because I feel like all of those recommendations I still stand by. So have at it. But I do want to add a few recommendations this year because I have read more books since then. And in particular, I wanted to talk about like which books from Nonfiction Book Club I like have particularly loved and would recommend. All of them were books that I was glad I read because I learned from them, but there were definitely a few that like my feelings are a little bit more hesitant on. So I'm gonna pick out 2 right now, one from like the Nicole end of things and one from my end of things to recommend. So the first one that I would recommend from the Nicole end of things, like a more sociology book, is Ghosts in the Schoolyard by Eval Ewing. This is like a surprisingly thin but packed book about Chicago public schools and how they got shut down and like how the community responded. I think like this is like maybe I think one of the best like academic books I've read where it's just like the language manages to be both so like human but still academic. Like you feel like you are getting a rigorous study of something, but like not like the people who are being studied are being treated like objects, which is I think actually like a fundamental goal of this book is to actually treat the people who are being like assessed here as actual people. And so this was like a very good reading experience, but also like there's definitely, you know, a very frustrating and bleak core to this because it is about how like Black students are being disproportionately targeted by these public school shutdowns and how that's affecting local communities and how all of these things feed into each other. The other book that I really enjoyed from our discussion this year from my end of things was Superior: The Return of Race Science by Angela Saini. This is about like population genetics and how like we have declared race a scientific thing without it actually being a scientific thing, and she's really working to basically kind of undo this myth that like race is an actual biological thing, and she's going into like what it means for us to talk about race as a scientific thing or versus like as a social construct. And so this was like a book that I had been wanting to get to for a while because I had heard her give a talk on this subject, and I still like I found that talk really useful and very good and interesting, but I still like needed to sort of like have a lot of things kind of like ironed out for me. Like I kind of needed to work through a few more things to understand what I was understanding. And so I think this book is very effectively laid out, and I really enjoyed it, even if it's also one of those books where you're kind of like, shit, people suck, you know? I think this might have been the book where we started feeling like, maybe our books are going to be about like how science sucks sometimes. So this is definitely a book about how science sucks sometimes, but I think it's a useful document to have. Another recommendation that was not from Nonfiction Book Club, but this is a book I've talked about recently. This is Meet Me in the Bathroom: Rebirth and Rock and Roll in New York City from 2001 to 2011 by Lizzie Goodman. This is an oral history about the rise of indie rock in New York from 2001 to 2011, with a particular focus on the Strokes and how influential they were. I did like a full review of this along with Jessica Simpson's memoir, which I also thought was really good and interesting. So I'll link to that review down below. There are things about this book that I do find frustrating, especially in how it approaches its like way of talking about gentrification in New York. But overall, like this is an oral history that I found super interesting because like it took things from like my high school years that I like did not fully appreciate and really gave me like a new way to understand all of that. So yeah, that is stuff for Nonfiction November. Let me know if these books sound interesting to you. I am going this way because my books are on the ground next to me. But yeah, let me know if they sound interesting. Let me know what you guys are reading, and I hope you guys have a good November. Bye.